So I hope in the next 2 days as we engage here, that we also focus on how do we get the powers that be to understand absolutely critical need to do exactly what we are saying, to integrate these lofty principles in curriculum. I hope that our deliberations contribute to involving youth and those on the periphery in transitional justice processes through education and active engagement. And on this note, I welcome you to the 8th edition of the African Transitional Justice Forum. Thank you.
This year's edition of the forum came with its peculiar changes, but the fact that we are here today speaks to the success of your efforts, and I thank you all for that. Allow me at this juncture to also welcome our distinguished participants comprising of the representatives of the African Union member states, representatives of AU organs, regional economic communities and regional mechanisms, distinguished experts from the policy, practice and academic spheres of transitional justice, members of the African Reference Group for Transitional Justice, which was launched only yesterday, and of course representatives of youth and women in Africa under the aegis of the African Youth and African Women Transitional Justice Initiatives, both of whom we have endeavored to give equal opportunity on this forum. Distinguished participants, the theme of this year's forum, Transitional Justice and Education in Africa, Opportunities and Challenges for Peace, Resilience and Sustainable Development, flows from the African Union theme of the year and provides us a wonderful opportunity as transitional justice experts, policymakers and practitioners to contribute to the development of the African continent and to the realization of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want.
Transitional justice, Excellencies, is not one size fits all. The routes leading to effective transitional justice differ according to specificities of each country, the social, cultural, legal, and political particularities. In this respect, the African Union Transitional Justice Policy adopted in 2019 was indeed a milestone in our quest for African solutions to African problems. This policy serves as guidance for advancing transitional justice processes across the African continent, and it rightly stresses the importance of the principles of local ownership, inclusiveness, context specificity, and sustainability when designing and implementing transitional justice initiatives. In devising the best mechanisms to promote transitional justice, our ultimate objective is to help our societies transition from conflict to sustainable peace for democracy and development. I should add, also transition towards nation building. I am confident that if we do our fair share, we will ensure that our youth get the peaceful, just and inclusive future to which they are entitled.
What has run? Because I retired last year. So currently I'm the Emeritus Professor of International Relations in the same institution. Transitional justice is 30 years old. Only 5 years younger than my entire teaching career. So I want to appreciate the fact that I was given the opportunity, and I'll explain in a minute, to participate in the elaboration and the discussions around transitional justice in Africa. Of the 35 years, I only spent 10 years thinking about transitional justice. And again, I'll explain how I got to that. So the bulk of my presentation this morning really is I'm giving a very unconventional keynote address. What I want to do is to speak about my role and the role of other players in the articulation and the elaboration of the transitional justice framework. And in that context, I also want to acknowledge very much the work of the CSVR from the very outset, and then the work of the then Department of Political Affairs at the African Union. So, and the many individuals in this room, it feels like a reunion to me today, even though I've not been closely associated with the transitional justice debate over the last 5 or 6 years. And also I have to say this is my first meeting of the transitional justice framework. So what I'll do therefore in my discussion here is to talk about my 10-year encounter with transitional justice. And then take just about a minute or two at the end of my presentation to speak about the significance of education in building the future, a resilient and peaceful future. And I think the previous speaker have done an excellent job on that topic, so I won't spend a lot of time on it.
And so many others in this room. The forward to the African Union Transitional Justice Policy by the then Commissioner for Political Affairs, she said that a policy is a mere piece of paper. You can have excellent policies, and policies are not our challenge, one of the challenges on the continent. We have excellent policies, whether on democratization, good governance, development, transitional justice. But the most important thing is transforming this policy into practical reality, ensuring that they are effectively implemented and having results in our member states.
We do have the very delicate task of transitional justice after a relative period of peace and stability, both from a societal and political point of view. But we have had the consequences and effects of colonialism and slavery, and the use of indentured laborers in Mauritius. And following from that, in 2008, the government enacted legislation to establish a Truth and Justice Commission. And so the commission had a couple of years to do its work and produce a report making recommendations. And there were many recommendations. In fact, the report covered several volumes, gathering the evidence and testimonies of people in Mauritius. And the various areas that it covered includes issues of land disputes, acquisitive prescription of land, memorialization, reconciliation, and the recommendations to achieve better social and economic justice, and also there were recommendations regarding employment and housing for descendants of slaves and indentured laborers. And so these measures have been implemented well, there was an interministerial committee which was set up to look into the recommendations, and work is underway still to implement these recommendations. I can elaborate maybe at a later stage.
Yeah, you still have some time.
Yes,
Please go ahead.
thank you. So these measures are with the Truth and Justice Commission recommendations, and as has been alluded to by the Minister, Mauritius is also focused on nation building. So we also have a welfare state, so a lot of emphasis is placed on nation building and improving the standards of living of all Mauritians. And again, there's a number of measures which have been put in place by the government towards that goal, which I will unpack later, at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madame Zamu.
Je voulais juste rectifier pour dire que je ne viens pas de la République démocratique du Congo, mais je viens de la République centrafricaine. Donc l'expérience de la justice transitionnelle dans mon pays c'est fait, je pense, depuis plusieurs années déjà, parce que mon pays, c'est un pays qui a été meurtri depuis plusieurs décennies de conflits, qui a failli plonger le pays vers le génocide. Mais grâce au concours de la communauté internationale, de l'Union africaine, que je salue ici, le département paix et sécurité de l'Union africaine a pris la question de la République centrafricaine en main pour un retour à la paix et pour plusieurs dialogues où il y avait eu signature d'un accord pour la paix et la réconciliation qui a été mené à Khartoum et signé à Bangui en 2019. Donc après cela, je pense qu'il y a eu des forums qui se sont succédés. Il y a eu le forum de Bangui et qui a abouti à des réconciliations, qui a abouti à la mise en place du forum de la commission Vérité et Réconciliation et également de la création d'une cour pénale spéciale pour juger les violations de droits de l'homme qui ont été commises dans ce pays. Et je voudrais dire que l'expérience de la justice transitionnelle dans mon pays a été tout autant positive que négative. Positif pour le fait que le pays a été occupé pour plus de la moitié par des groupes armés, mais avec l'accord de paix et progressivement avec le dialogue qui a été soutenu tant par l'Union africaine que l'ensemble de la communauté internationale, le pays est pacifié et le pays est pacifié aujourd'hui et les groupes armés, quand bien même ils n'existent pas sur l'ensemble du territoire, ils existent encore quelque part dans le pays. Et la Cour pénale spéciale qui a vu le jour, qui est une expérience, qui a une première expérience, qui est une juridiction hybride, qui comporte à la fois des magistrats centrafricains et des juges internationaux, a déjà commencé à rendre des décisions par rapport aux crimes qui a été commis dans le pays. La Cour pénale internationale également a rendu des décisions. Mais je dis aujourd'hui qu'on a eu une expérience négative du fait qu'on associe à la fois, comme vous le disiez tout à l'heure, qu'on doit associer tout le monde autour de la table. Effectivement, dans mon pays, tout le monde a été associé par rapport à cette recherche de paix, puisque aujourd'hui, dans mon pays, nous retrouvons également certains membres des groupes armés qui sont dans le gouvernement, et tout le processus est en train d'être mené avec l'implication et à la fois des victimes et des membres des groupes armés qui ont plongé le pays dans la crise. Donc je voulais dire que la recherche de la paix n'a pas de prix et nous sommes obligés de travailler en même temps avec ceux-là même qui ont été à l'origine de la crise et également avec les victimes. La commission Vérité, quant à elle, a travaillé Mais comme vous le savez, établir la vérité dans un contexte où nous avons à la fois les bourreaux et les victimes est tout aussi difficile. Donc aujourd'hui, cette commission a essayé de mettre en place ces démembrements, ces antennes sur l'ensemble du pays, mais la recherche de la paix avec des bourreaux qui ont encore, dans une certaine mesure, ceux qui ont encore des armes, empêche de dire la vérité et la commission a mal fonctionné. C'est comme ça que j'avais été désignée pour remettre en place, la première commission a été dissoute, donc j'ai été désignée pour mettre en place la nouvelle commission et c'est ce qui a été fait. Et donc je pense
conducting different consultations to gather inputs on the draft or on the policy option document. Ethiopia has started or initiated the policy or the process of transitional justice policy and decided to have the policy be prepared by the independent group of experts, unlike the process or unlike the conventional process that we have been using to adopt another policy and legislative framework, so that academicians, professors, policymakers, human rights and transitional justice experts have been invited, and 30 members of group of experts has been established, and that expert group has drafted not the policy draft but the policy option. So this is also unlike the process that we have used for another policy that we have adopted before. So the public has been given a chance to give a comment on the policy options paper or the green paper policy. So on this green paper or the policy option document, we have conducted about 80 plus consultative workshops throughout the country. That means 80, and 4,000 plus people has been participated in this info gathering consultative workshops, and women's vulnerable groups in general, IDPs have been given a chance to give their inputs on the policy paper. And the government finally received the final draft, or the final draft, I can say, of the Transitional Justice Policy Independent Group of Experts, then presented to the Council of Ministers for approval after conducting 4 validations. And then,
I mean, all of this, when I spoke, means that people have access to, justice to education. And this is really not something that is happening in all countries, not just in conflict countries, but also in poor or marginalized areas of post-conflict countries, or even in countries where they didn't go through conflict or post-dictatorship. I mean, for example, myself, I had the feeling when I was younger that everyone in Tunisia was had to go to school till the age of 16, which was not true. And I discovered this when I went into the marginalized regions. And I discovered that there was a public discourse or speech that told us that people access education, but it was not true. And this is right in many different other places. So we need to be also innovative in the way we provide education and go beyond school and the official education to those who don't have access to education. And I would like here to finish by a final thought for all those children that this year we have a start of school year now in September, and many children in many countries will not be able to start the school year in Sudan, in Gaza, in other places. So I wanted to finish by a thought for those children. Thank you.
Thank you. Last year, the University of the Western Cape launched a book project published by Springer, Business and Human Rights in Africa. I saw the concept note and I was like, maybe we could try this. I told my boss, Anna, I'm like, Anna, we're going to send a concept note, an abstract. If the chapter is accepted, we'll write this chapter. We wrote a chapter on transitional justice tools and business in Africa. When it came, we wrote the chapter and we sent it out. When it came back from the reviewers, 2 reviewers accepted it on the go with minor corrections. One reviewer, he stood on it and was like, our argument is flawed. He's like, comparing transitional justice, the African Union Transitional Justice Policy to the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights in Africa, United Nations Principle of Business and Human Rights. He says, comparing both of them is like comparing, in quotes, apples to oranges. He says, we cannot use transitional justice and business. It does not go. So the entire argument is flawed. Review the argument. When it came, I sat with Anna and we started preparing a rebuttal. I was really angry. And Anna's made a statement on our book, on our chapter, which it stuck with me to date. And I feel this is the problem with education and TJ in Africa. Anna says transitional justice has so much advanced in Africa that it should no longer be viewed as a descriptive process which states observe post-conflict reconstruction, but it should now be viewed as an approach. That statement has stuck with me today, and sometimes I say it in other places and I pretend I'm the one who coined it, but it's Anna who coined that statement, that TJ has so much advanced in Africa that we should now look at it as an approach. And it's from that perspective which I believe we should start engaging TJ from multiple approaches in terms of within the spheres of education. That is the education of the mind I'm looking at. Because if we could have experienced reviewers who refuse to liberate the idea that TJ has gone far beyond post-conflict reconstruction, where we can now use TJ to address several challenges. I think the second paragraph of the African Union Transitional Justice Policy, it also states that aside from addressing legacies of violent past, TJ could also be used to address governance deficits and developmental challenges. That is the kind of education in TJ we should be looking at. 2 developmental challenges and some governance deficits, I would say 2, 3, which are very, they are very autochthonous to this our times. We have first the issue of violent extremism. This is, and I note CSVR as being Anna says, a think and do tank, where we always try to come up with innovative and I would say audacious approaches, audacious moves of using the African Union Transitional Justice Policy. We've been working in Mali right now using that policy in addressing violent extremism. And I've been leading that initiative. And a lot of things we saw, which I'm going to come to the lessons learned from that in a moment. But I'm just giving you one initiative which we have been able to employ TJ. We have been able to liberate our minds from thinking that TJ comes only post-conflict. We are now understanding that we could even use TJ even pre-conflict as an early warning system, during conflict, and even post-conflict reconstruction. And like I said, I'm still going to come to that. But 2 things which I want us to really engage in to drive the education of the mind, of TJ being used as a tool to address governance deficit and developmental challenges. The first, I will look at climate change. The second, I will look at TJ and AI. When we look at the impacts of climate change, how do we adopt the TJ approach? So it's just a basic example, but it's something which I'm encouraging each and every one of us, going back to our various spheres of influence, to say, when I'm doing this thing, when I'm working right now, how do I adopt a transitional justice approach in my work? That is the education which I think it's necessary for us, all of us going back. Be you a doctor, be you a policymaker, working at the AU, civil society, how do you adopt a transitional justice approach in your work to push the agenda of the AUTJP? We're looking at the aspect of climate change. We could have reparations for those who have been impacted by the adverse effects of climate change. For instance, we have got businesses which are impacting climate and which are driving poverty. Those businesses or these business-related activities could carry out reparations. We could look at institutional reforms. What can the state do to reform the business sector or whosoever is driving the effects of climate change? Looking at the aspect of truth commissions. What are businesses doing and which are causing adverse impacts on climate change? There is this report by, if I'm not mistaken, Bredler and Hodler from 2019, which states that as a result of the oil spills in the Niger Delta, babies are twice as likely to die in their first month of birth if their mother had lived within that area, even if conception happened 5 years after they had left. We need truth commissions for these kinds of things. We need prosecutions for such actions which have impacted the climate. This is just an example I just came up right now on how we could use TJ in climate change. We look at the aspect of early warning system. and AI. That is where I'm coming from.